The room was a sweltering vessel, and its rhythmic pulsations defeated Ruby to all conscious thought. She lay in a fetal position in the corner farthest from the door, her wide eyes fixed on it, awaiting her promised visitor. Charlie was dead. His body would be processed. As she lay here, buffeted by a wall and floor and unable to rest, she tried to imagine what they might make from the man she had loved. Perhaps his bones and muscles would make up the main components of a piano. That would be fitting. His skin made into paper to write songs on. Cigars from his fingers, perhaps. Maybe his other foot would make another gun. It had worked well the first time, despite Marlowe's sabotage. So many assurances the weapons dealer gave as he and his crew loaded them into the van after finding them beside the wreckage. Looking back at it now, she could see their desperation to make amends for their contribution to her and Charlie's crimes. Their fake smiles oblivious as she shuddered in the rain as Charlie lay oblivious to the world. She wished she could have kept him alive. Just a few more minutes to look into his eyes, to tell him that she loved him. When Marlowe's boys started to reach for them, she clung to him tightly, refusing to be separated from him, like she was from. The shifting air now became even more unbearable as the smoker molded himself from the wall. His suit was covered by the freshly disgusted wetness of the muscles, seeping moisture. He grinned at Ruby as he pulled a cigar from his coat pocket. Ruby held herself tightly as the hopelessness took hold, and he lit up. "Well, sweetheart, was it worth it?" All in vain. Everything. The vision of Charlie being carried away, only to have Marlowe later regretfully tell her that he had succumbed to his wounds. When she insisted on seeing the body, Marlowe had his men seize hold of her and bring her to this ever-beating tumor that was her cell. There were things that she saw when she was being drugged through the warehouse, things that Marlowe procured at the base of his operations. A walkway that arched above a mess of teeth, hair, and ever-bleeding flesh, tendrils reaching out of cylinders full of precious blood. In return, men in safety gear were allowed small pieces of the cancer that would separate from the mass by handfuls. Yep, that's the source of it, Ruby. It's where we come from. It's what all of you are being fed to. Your plasma at least, but in your case, baby, I think we're gonna make an exception. The smoker approached her with Caesar's mock pity, his squelching steps unhalted despite the floor's refusal for stillness. When he was before her, he squatted down to force eye contact while taking a dreaded inhale from the cigar. Ruby's eyes filled with tears as she tried to brace herself against the fumes. He blew a cloud, black as her eyes, then lightening to a dull gray, then to white. When it cleared, Ruby was no longer looking into the face of her old lover, but upon a valley of charred black stones. Numberless beasts, goats, bulls, cattle, pigeons, doves, ravens, all strewn about, cut open with their life's blood, slowly forming an ocean which filled the valley. A cacophony rising as people plunged themselves into the crimson water to drown. Above the calamity, the sky remained dark, cloud-like smoke billowing from a great furnace. Ruby turned around to see herself amongst the multitude of pure human forms, all whole and unmolested. Yet they all wept in bemoaning agony. Ruby began to tremble at their misery, for she knew it must be founded in truth that pertained to her as well. A sharp chill ran through her as men and women passed by her to join the rest of those who perished in the valley of blood. Old and young, beautiful and ugly, solitary or holding hands in groups of families, dragging their children along with no concern for their distress. The clouds remained dark, and Ruby felt hopeless, hopeless as all these people. A compulsion was building up inside her to turn towards the crowd. What other choice was there? What did it matter if she carried on? Charlie was dead. Caesar too. Her parents would likely be killed for her transgressions as well. The world was a creation of malign intent, and humanity's purpose was to simply fuel it with its demise. Suddenly there was a voice, powerful and in tune to an ancient melody of a forever lost land. The throng of hopeless souls halted their willful demise and headed to the speaker, to whom Ruby now beheld. Whether the naked form was a male or female, Ruby could not tell. She only knew that it was beautiful, and that the deepest lust began to burn within her. To experience the flesh of this being in whatever way possible was the purest physical sense that she would strive for. It was the only thing that mattered. When it spoke again, she began to feel the crowd move towards the voice, pushing her forward as well. The excitement of getting close to this being, of touching those close to her, the joys of flesh, sin unfactored. She heard herself laughing, weeping, moaning. All was not lost. Pleasure still remained, so life remained. What more did they need? What human being needs a God who abandons them, tells them that they are unworthy of salvation, that they are only worth their own flesh and blood? The being understood all too well these feelings, and there was only one outcome: supplication and devotion to the endless pleasures of the flesh. The crowd began to merge together in an ecstasy of endless sensual experience. Nothing was forbidden, not anymore. There was no one to judge. Ruby was about to join in when a shudder passed through her heart, a burning sensation that kept her still while the degradation occurred around her. Her lustful feelings were still present, but this burning was too much to override. The being was speaking, singing, while its servants obeyed vigilantly, until it suddenly caught sight of Ruby's stillness. It began to approach her, its beautiful limbs shimmering even in the blackened overcast. The lust had become unbearable, yet the flame in her heart kept her from acting upon it. However, when it was before her, Ruby realized she was in the presence of a hairless mass of pitiful proportions. This was neither male or female, neither was it human. It was a void mockery of power, a loud voice and an illusion of beauty. The lust was completely left, and the burning had become a comfortable warmth. "Will you not partake in my joy?" the thing asked Ruby. Its voice was pathetically weak and frail. The fact that it had such an impact previously was farcical to her. She looked around to find that the sights of fleshly pleasure that herself wanted to accept now disgusted her. By this point, the violence had begun. The entrails were being passed around amongst the orgies, and the stench of emptied bowels made Ruby want to vomit. The thing's face had become a childish grimace, and all at once, Ruby Brennan came to the realization that the reality she had been living in was formed in the image of this outcast, whose glory was a shameless imitation of the one who had given its power long before. It led people to prosperity, as long as they were fit to defile themselves, to act against their own nature. Life progressed and technology increased, allowing for new ways to experience methods of fleshly excess. Centuries upon centuries of a base obsession, to the point where the entire aspect of the human form became the lead source of architecture and currency. Ruby also saw the mound of tumorous amalgamations of hair and teeth and eyes. The latchers and the renders were merely the underlings that were condemned alongside this thing, who basically took possession of the abominable cancerous masses fueled by human plasma. Caesar died because of this thing. Ruby's mother and father gave up their bodies to keep it as far away from her as possible. Marlowe made a faulty firearm for Charlie on behalf of this cancer. The smoke cleared as the door opened. Marlowe stepped inside, void of any facade or courtesy. He and two of his men approached Ruby, pulling her violently to her feet. A question was running through her mind. "They want you, Ruby," said Marlowe with a sneer. Why did Charlie's foot work? All of you. She was led out into the walkway, where she could see the mass below. The workers were no longer feeding blood to it. Ruby knew what was in store for her, and now she knew who was behind all of it, she supposed. But why had she made it this far? What encouraged her to leave home and find Charlie? To not deliver him up to the renders to save herself? To love Charlie? To love it all? If there was no hope, as was presented by the smoker, why was the burning comfort still in her heart? They began to go down the stairs. Ruby could already see the tendrils reaching for her, but she was calm. "Marlowe!" A scream was heard in the distance as a man came running to the guardrail of the platform. Ruby felt her bottom lip begin to quiver strangely. "Marlowe! This guy's alive!" A jolt hit Ruby's body. The burning filled her chest as she halted her steps, causing the two men to reach for her arms and violently try to move her along. They couldn't. Then, without any effort it seemed, Ruby pulled herself free from the man on her right and grabbed the man on the left's pistol from his holster. They were dead before Marlowe could completely turn around. Ruby fired into the deceiver's throat, then shoved him into the mound, a choking gurgle of agony, more satisfying than a scream could ever be. Shouts filled the warehouse, followed by gunfire. A quickening sent her to each audible source, and blood followed. Screams, hopelessness, remorse. They wanted the pleasure to continue on for at least one more day. No living being would be more than enough to grant them a few fleeting seconds of agony. What followed after was not allowed to enter into Ruby's mind. She heard the lullaby of her mother, a love song from Charlie in her honor, and another faint sound that still seemed to drown out the rest. It was an immaculate glorification that had been sung behind the dark clouds since before the mockery came. A true beauty that had all made it possible to ignore and spread no more acknowledgment of its existence. And Ruby believed now that a remnant had indeed been found. She was part of it, and nothing could stand between her and the love she now felt for a face unseen. Her eyes turned to the abomination. Forms were beginning to merge from it. They were devils, the nightmares that she had feared all her life pitifully stretched and elongated themselves towards her, not to harm her, but to plead. The burning comfort and joy seemed to overtake her completely. She felt something in her hand, then the scent of gasoline, and the wretched screaming of the abominations denied their physical form. When Ruby came back to herself, she was standing over the broken form of Charlie Valentine. A word came to her, in a whisper that insinuated a future of uncertainty on their part, but for the speaker, all was clear upon him. So many in this world would deny his presence, while most would remain willfully ignorant. Ruby and Charlie themselves may have moments of doubt ahead, and the others, set aside for his intended purposes, would find their own road hard. But a summation was given in a single command: endure.
You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.